Welcome all of you to the online training workshop in advancing government innovation and leveraging frontier technologies for disaster risk reduction and resilience. Today, it's a jointly workshop which is organized by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs and its UN Project Office on Governance and the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Today, we have session 2 on leveraging frontier technologies for DRR and resilience, and we're going to do a deep dive on technologies as module 2. We will have experts with us who will present solutions that countries have in integrating innovations and ICT. And we will also cover Earth observation technologies for disaster recovery and reconstruction and the use of technology for coastal risk assessments. Let me introduce our first speaker, Mr. David Green, who is the head of the disaster program of NASA, United States. He will cover about frontier technology in build resilience in practice for those who are at risk, and will share with us how NASA is utilizing frontier technologies such as satellites, urban science programs, International Space Station, and similar methods to ensure resilience by providing information products and analytical tools. So countries are asking us also how they can access these technologies. And I hope Mr. David Green will share with us. Thank you, Mr. Green. We are very pleased that you have accepted our invitation and stay with us at these late hours in the morning in Washington. Over to you. You need to unmute yourself.
Mute, there we go.
Perfect.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, loud and clear. Yes.
All right, thank you. Well, once again, let me thank Anna and the, it's glad to be back here with the organizers, with many colleagues, and on issues that are very timely and very important. Are my slides showing? I don't see them here yet. So this is an opportunity. I lead the disasters program at NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, but I also work closely with the UNDRR on the global risk assessment framework, bringing an interdisciplinary approach to assessing risk, but building resilience. I'm also the chair of the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, which is many of the satellite agencies from around the world. So I will today highlight in a few minutes some of the approaches that we're taking currently, but also give you some ideas of directions we're going in. And I will also share with you how to access the data, the information, and the tools, and suggest that there are opportunities for partnerships. Let's go ahead, please. So NASA's disasters program is focused on risk reduction. And while many talk about hazards, hazards are not disasters. We definitely include and understand that the exposure, the vulnerability, and the social capacity of communities and nations to respond to disasters is as important, and perhaps more important, as we bring these technologies to bear on really building resilience. So my program, and I've put a few links in there, the mapping portal, all the information that we have at NASA, the data is free and open. The maps, the tools are also freely available. And we work with global scale and with regional partners, many of those in the countries represented here, but we also have hubs and centers, such as the Singapore Earth Observatory, or working with the Asia Disaster Preparedness Center and the Pacific Disaster Center as a way of amplifying our outreach and the ability for you to interact with us. We think about the full cycle. In order to reach resilience, it has to involve preparedness and the information that we have and must share before events, during events, and increasingly to be smart on recovery for sustainability. Let's go to the next slide. For example, we are trying to bring our technology to bear to answer simple questions like, what does it take to keep a community safe and prepared from rising floodwaters? Tools and information such as the maps and dashboards are a way for us to synthesize, bring that data into a form that can be visualized and understood. Where are the areas of concern? What are the disruptions that may occur? And as the line says, bringing risk management to actually avoid these lifelines, these roads, these food systems from ever being disrupted. And if they are, to provide the information to reconnect those communities as quickly as possible. Next slide. Of course, in the time of COVID, we have the added complication of really the multi-hazard situation, floods and storms and health concerns. So our information must be integrated and interdisciplinary. The maps and tools here showing areas impacted during Amphoon, the flood extent, the impacts on communities, and to guide people where is it safe and where are there potential impacts, so people can make the decisions for planning, for response, and for that quick recovery, and in this example, the humanitarian relief. Next slide. From NASA's perspective, collecting the right information from an entire Earth system perspective and bringing it to local decisions, being able to view it, to catalog it, and to perform it in a way that can be understood. Here, the moving picture at the bottom is actually from the Australian wildfires, which showed the extent of the plumes spreading out across Australia, but also, as it turned out, to be of a global reach. So while the fires actively were in Australia, the impacts reached across the entire globe. Next slide. Dashboards that we present to bring the technology to bear, to translate that and visualize in stories here in the United States in these images, but to let you know that we have global reach. So similar information on dashboards to take the technology to visualize, to map, predict, and translate. Next slide. Now, NASA has a host of advanced technologies in the form of satellites, sensors on the International Space Station, small satellites we call CubeSats, and airplanes, ground stations, and most important, our partnerships. As a part of the Committee on Earth Observation satellites, there are many that we have at NASA and share openly, but in partnership with those around the world can bring all of these assets to bear as long as there's a mechanism to work with the committees and to understand that this information is not just when a disaster happens, but working every day, every year to bring these technologies and make them relevant. Next slide. I'm going to talk about two approaches to frontier technologies. One that is just emerging, we call the new observing strategy. And the other, which is taking advantage of many of the analytical capabilities that are coming online to capture data, process data, visualize it, and use it for decisions. Next slide. The new observing strategy that's being developed by NASA and other partners is trying to think what has taken place over many years, and that is individual observations, centers, or technologies. But as the amount of data has become richer and more numerous, the sophistication of our technology has become almost beyond what individuals can understand. And so we're getting to the point now that we're looking at our models, our forecasts, and even the events themselves, triggering the technology to self-activate, to acquire the information that we know we need, to actually have the observation systems and technologies collaborate with each other in terms of smart enterprise of observations, and to create an interacting architecture that complements and extends what any individual, center, or organization could really do. So I'll talk about that a little more, the new observing strategy. Next slide. In some cases, we need new ways of visualization, bringing that information together in traditional ways of geospatial information for images, but more so now for analytics, and even going from a two-dimensional into people using real data in real time as if they are in the situation for decision makers, for technologists, and for others to utilize. Next image, please. The last example was one of being in the situation of a hurricane. Here, during an earthquake last year, real-time situation, data that exists in a variety of portals, technology enterprises, was grasped in real time, put together with the social and economic data of buildings, infrastructure, and population. So images which in the past only were meaningful to scientists and engineers can now be used in real time in collective ways, so those who are in the public or communities or national leaders can have additional tools to understand the situation that's arriving, that is upon them, and how it can resolve itself. Next slide. The new analytical framework is taking advantage of a lot of the new tools. They are depicted on the side is actually a future satellite system, which is no longer just one satellite, but a collection of small satellites working together in harmony to collect information, in this case called tropics, planned to collect information about tropical storms. Facilitating new ways of accessing, integrating, and understanding how all these different data sets, whether it's a collection of satellites or multiple satellites, Earth stations, social economic data sets, can all come together as part of the new observing strategy and a new way of doing analysis. This example here of small satellites, very nimble, less expensive, easier to deploy and maintain, combined with the machine learning, gathering a collection of information, but learning and using the new tools and analytics and artificial intelligence to fill in the understanding and deal with the increasingly large volumes of not only large volumes of data, but large volumes of a variety of types of data. Next slide. The technology drivers that those here are interested in are either being driven by the new developments in the engineering and the hardware, the miniaturization of systems that are now being used. Here with the satellites and observations and airborne, we're interested obviously in things like optics and circuitry, new materials and new components, the miniaturization of the sensors and the networks themselves, and how they can perform and process that information. We certainly have the big data analytics that are coming to bear, and as I mentioned, artificial intelligence and machine learning that in some cases can do what humans can do, but maybe faster, or interpolate to fill in the gaps. The autonomous decision-making, the idea that these systems can actually integrate and work together, the satellite system telling a ground system to turn itself on and start collecting information, and gather information from a weather forecast to actually tell a flood system to turn itself on, regulate a reservoir, and by the way, inform the media and the community that they should be taking an action. This intelligent interaction, the smartness of our technology in partnership with human decisions is where we think these frontier technologies are going. Next slide. Collectively, as depicted here, we have nodes of information from the sky and from the air, information that's on the ground. We need to coordinate that information in an intelligent and collaborative way. And the technologies that we have and that I've just mentioned allow us this new approach to science and data intelligence for environmental awareness, situational awareness, rapid information for problem solving and planning, and the ability to integrate it with our new ways of communicating and cooperating. Next slide. I'm going to wrap it up there. The idea that our technology on a global scale, with new frontiers of how that information can be turned into knowledge and better visualized. Whether you're in a community here in Colombia and parts of South America depicted where landslides, floods, earthquakes are a concern, but the information must get to communities. On the left, an example of the remnants of Cyclone Idai. We see the images that show the power and infrastructure in the city impacted by the hurricane, by the cyclone, by the floods, informing people and individuals what is happening, where they are in the situation, and what technologies can afford them the knowledge to recover quickly. So thank you for your attention. I'm available now for some questions. And as I said, I've provided the websites, links to our portal, and we have a team of partners and individuals around the world to assist as best we can.
Thank you, David, for your comprehensive presentation. We have learned a lot on new observing strategies, new analytical framework, and I took very good note on how technology become information and this information being utilized by community and people and decision makers. So thank you for your presentation and staying with us. Let me open the floor for some Q&A. We have one question in the, maybe you can see it, I will read for you.
Where is the data collected for the systems, and what about data reliability?
Exactly.
Speaking for NASA, NASA has a number of data centers. The data centers are Earth Observatory Repository, where all of that information can be accessed online through the data centers. They are arranged by different themes, such as Earth systems or ocean or land cover change. And so we can provide you links to that. If you go to our portal, it will also provide links, but those data repositories are open and available. They may need assistance to best interpret that information, but we have partners and tools to do that. And through the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites and others, sister agencies in the US, Europe, Asia, and around the world are increasingly opening up access to the remote sensing data, as well as social and social economic data.
David, I have a question here. Could you expand a little bit more on how global satellite data gets down to communities for decision making? What kind of decisions and actions has been taken to your experience? Right. And how do communities advocate for such use, or how the communities get involved?
So NASA and many of our partners have projects that reach beyond our science community by having elements of outreach and education and capacity building. For example, much of our information right now for disasters in a time of COVID, working with communities, other parts of the United Nations, the humanitarian groups, the Red Crosses, the humanitarian non-governmental sectors, education and training programs like yourself, to raise awareness But we do have programs working in communities of displaced populations, for example, due to floods or hurricanes, landslides, working directly at the community level in partnership with those decision makers to provide the training and awareness of the types of information, to get it into the hands of people, and then to provide the resources throughout the time frame of preparedness. And I'll give you an example, even in recovery. We've recently been working with island communities on recovery observatories, actually going in and working with communities to find out what is the situational information they need in recovery to assure that they have the types of information on a scale that they can actually see the buildings, the infrastructure, the communities that they live in, and be able to translate that information into something that is meaningful. So we work increasingly with relief organizations, with resilience officers or mappers, or even sectors like youth organizations who are often the translators of the technology into the culture and into the local understanding.
Thank you, David. We have two questions well, we're getting more and more questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
One question is about how can we get a time series for atmospheric parameter if required? And what capacity building opportunities are available for developing countries like Africa, such as Africa, to make use of the information for risk reduction and development planning?
Okay, so let me start with the second. In terms of capacity building, at least speaking for NASA, NASA has a very active capacity building program. One called RSET is an online training, very much like today, but it allows extended periods of online training with the tools, with the data, to help people understand how to acquire that information, how to use it, and how to exercise it for their use. And quite a few of those are on applications, for example, relating to floods or relating to mapping of food and crop issues, but they are done in partnership with user communities and are open to thousands of people throughout the year on these thematic topics. In addition, NASA and partners have hubs in different parts of the world focused on capacity building. At the Disaster Preparedness Center, for example, in Bangkok, is co-located a NASA hub for capacity building, education, and outreach. And in Africa, we have hubs in Kenya and Niger, East and West Africa, and other parts of the world, that hub system that allows us to work into the community level. I can remember the other question, sorry.
The question is about how can we get a time series for atmospheric parameters if required?
So the time series of information, much of the information as satellites fly over and as different models are run, that information is produced on, there are what we call routine information that comes out on a schedule and can provide a time series. And that information is collected, is available historically for months, years, depending on the systems. And then for particular events, there is information, depending on the type of satellite, the type of information, it's provided on well-known schedules. So those time series can be analyzed historically and into the future.
Related to right now the COVID-19 crisis, during the pandemic, how this data can help us in the times of floods, for example?
We're looking at the combination of information that shows people where the flooding, for example, is occurring, and knowing that that may require responders to go into those situations so that they can understand the priority of where they need to work. But we're including in that information not just the flood event, but information about the density of population, the vicinity of hospitals, the location of centers where people may have to evacuate to, so that the appropriate supplies, medical supplies, or practices for distancing or other management can be fully combined. So it is enriching the situational awareness beyond just the single hazard to the type of behavior and the type of additional supplies that might be needed, such as the medical supplies or the proximity, even for responders, been providing information so that typically responders who can work interchangeably and close to each other need to behave differently. So as that information for mapping and tools is provided, it is accompanied by information about how to interact safely in those situations. In addition, the ability to get remote information is avoiding the unnecessary movement of people, particularly responders, into situations that if they do not have to go, they can avoid going, because we can give them information remotely to tell them what the situation is so they can better prioritize.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I have two more questions. We have many, but I select two good ones for you. All are good, but time is limited. One question from the Philippines. Can we say that satellite arrays are collecting global information equally for decision making? Meaning that technology does not introduce information inequality where some areas are rich info and others are poor?
So the information from satellites comes in a variety of forms. Some of the data, such as those from NASA, the NOAA, and other agencies in the United States, and some systems in Europe, the data is free and open, and is readily available around the world to all communities. And as I said, there are programs to help build the capacity to acquire and use. In addition, there are data that is commercial and that needs to be licensed, but the programs in place are to, what we say, open the data. Even if it's not free, there is a mean to access it and utilize it in a inclusive and broadly available form. So the efforts are to reach communities equally, in some cases free and open, and it's almost all cases open in some available and accessible format. And we do work quite a lot in the Philippines.
Yes, thank you so much. I still have questions from Sudan and from other countries, Indonesia too, so maybe we will be able to answer after the meeting. But there is one which, thank you for your wonderful presentation. In my case, it's gone from in my case, I deal with communities where ability to access, analyze, and visualize such data and information for decision making on time is hard due to various reasons. Among such reasons, I can name of lack of skills and knowledge and tools for this. Can NASA in any way provide any kind of support? By the way, thank you for online training you just mentioned. Over.
So as I said, there is widely available training, and we also do participation at community levels and do provide the means, recognizing that not everyone needs to also understand the data or the technology. There is an emphasis, at least in NASA and in some other agencies, to develop the applications. That is the tools that you can use, and many can use almost immediately, whether to understand the risks to their crops and food, or risks of air quality, or the risks to water resources. And so in parallel with understanding the tools and the data, there is a lot of work to provide and focus on what I was talking about before, is the information and the knowledge sharing. So I hope that is understandable, and that may include things like providing the maps or providing the awareness of how to use the information. There are programs to support those application areas.
Thank you, Mr. Green. With this last question, we close your presentation and your session. We would like to thank you once again from UNDRR and UNPOG for staying with us at these late hours in Washington and sharing with us your learning and experience from NASA. We still have 7 or 8 questions to respond to participants, and we will come back to you for try to respond after the workshop. Thank you very much, and have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Let me continue the session still on Earth observation, because I will introduce Mr. Koji Suzuki-san. Mr. Koji Suzuki is currently a project director at Asia Disaster Reduction Center in Kobe. In this role, he has worked to promote further disaster resilience in Asia and Pacific region in collaboration with 31 national disaster management organizations. He was also an executive director for International Cooperation and National Research Institute for Earth Observation and Disaster Resilience. Right now, he also chairs the steering committee of Sentinel Asia, leading the development of a long-term strategy of Sentinel Asia. Mr. Koji Suzuki-san, the floor is yours. You have to...
thank you, Anna-san. Do you hear me?
Very well. I cannot see you yet. Yeah, now it's perfect.
Our side. Okay.
I can see you. We can see you.
Okay. Actually, internet is not very stable in my side, so I'm afraid if my voice is safely heard or not. Today, I will be sharing some of the initiatives on frontier technologies for DRR, which I am now engaging in. Next page, please. Oh, it is slow. Okay. These are for communicating risk information in lost communication situations. And also I'll touch on tracking the movement of people. This is COVID-19 related. And I will briefly touch on the new interface on satellite remote sensing platform for disasters. Next, please. Okay, the task force team organized by Cabinet Office for Science and Technology and the Cabinet Office for National Space Strategy have been focusing on the information sharing technologies in lost communication. In emerging situations, telephone, internet, and other communication infrastructure sometimes do not work. In lost communication situation, GNSS, Q-ANPI system, smartphone relay system would be solution. Next, please. This is the introduction page of Q-ANPI system. With this Q-ANPI system, the Emergency Operations Center can get the information on evacuation centers in lost communication. The number of evacuees, gender, names of evacuees in the evacuation centers, who are injured, how much they are injured, what are the needed supplies. Those information can be shared with this Q-ANPI system. Those information can be shared even in lost communication situations. With emergency operations centers with Q-ANPI system, which is very critical for very effective emergency rescue and operations. It is a GNSS technology application for emerging situations. Next, please. In lost communication situation, the smartphone relay information communication system is the effective smartphone application to get the field information. The light blue area on the slide is the loss communication area. With Wi-Fi direct, Bluetooth, and smartphone with this application, the field information can be shared and relayed automatically among the nearby smartphones. Pictures, emails, voice message stored by the application in the smartphones can be automatically shared and relayed to nearby smartphones. Once one of the smartphones are in the area where the internet is available, the stored information is transmitted to Emergency Operations Center so that Emergency Operations Center can get the real field information from the individual smartphones in the field of disaster affected. Next, please. Yes. And this is the technology to disseminate the disaster risk information to the area in lost communications. With smartphone and GNSS signal receiver, you can receive information through the satellite if you are in the area where the GNSS signal is available. Either message on the mountaintop or on the sea far away from the land or deep in the valley, you can receive the message through GNSS on the emergency or disaster risk information, including early warning message. This signal receiver is as large as a credit card and the cost around $40 each. With this technology, people in lost communication can be kept communicated. Next, please. The next one is for COVID-19 related. This is the application of mobile phone communication data, which is stored by mobile network operators. The mobile phone communication data are location-specific and time-specific of the mobile phone subscribers. Next, please. You can trace the movement of the people, movement of the mobile phone subscribers. The subscribers do not need to download any application. Next, please. Next. Okay. Once some mobile phone users are identified as COVID-19 infected, you can track the movement of them, where they were and when they were, and with whom they might have contacted with. With this software, the name of it is MobiPack. You can identify the COVID-19 clusters and make the alert to the people who might have made contacted with COVID-19 infected before. You can also apply MobiPack software to analyze the movement or reaction of the people who receive the disaster risk information, such as early warning. When people receive the early warning information, they respond to the information and make actions. Some of them go to the shelters or safer places. Those behaviors can be analyzed with MobiPack software. Based on the analysis, disaster management organization can improve the warning system and operations or information itself. Next, please. Next, please. And this is the last one. The last one is the remote sensing technology for observed disaster damage data. is for decision-making support for emerging situations. Next, please. Oh, this is the previous one. Okay. In emerging situations, you can activate the satellite observation platform named Sentinel Asia, ask the space agencies to get the satellite imagery and get analyzed data of disaster-affected area. You can get the information on where is damaged with analyzed satellite imagery. But to activate and apply this platform, a lot of agencies involved this process for emergency observation. You have to identify which satellite of the agencies to be activated to get the imagery very effectively, which agencies will be analyzing the imagery, how analyzed data can be downloaded. Those very complex process of the Earth observation in emerging situations can be streamlined. The system, current system was not, the present system was not very user-friendly. Next, please. To overcome this situation and to make the system more user-friendly platform for satellite observation, Central Asia developed Optimus, which is short for Operation Planning Tool for Earth Observation Mission. With Optimus, this platform, this system, you can optimize the use of space resource by integrating system of the platform, including identifying the most appropriate satellite to get the imagery of a disaster-affected area. You can track and follow up the status of their work automatically, and different users can request, access, provide the satellite imagery data with Optimus. With Optimus, the very complex flow of the emergency observation by satellite, you can easily access the data, observe the status of the operation, and apply the satellite imagery for more friendly, more easily for their emergency operations. Thank you very much for your attention. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Suzuki-san. We are going to thank you for your presentation, and we have already some questions in the Q&A feature for you, but we are planning to have 2 presentations, and then we will open the Q&A for a discussion. So let me introduce our next speaker, Mr. Sang Chi, who is Assistant Researcher in Assessment and Emergency Management Department of the National Disaster Reduction Center of China at the Ministry of Emergency Management. Mr. Sang has been engaged in DRR for many years with past experience in the comprehensive disaster assessment of major disasters such as Lushan earthquake and the Ludian earthquakes. We have also many questions about earthquakes and technology for earthquakes. So I hope these questions can also come to Mr. Sang. Mr. Sang, the floor is yours. You need to unmute yourself.
Hey, good morning. This is morning. I don't know. It's afternoon. It's Beijing here. It's my pleasure to join you as one of the presenters of this session. And I'm Mr. Zhang Chi from the National Disaster Reduction Center of China. And my presentation today is about post-disaster comprehensive assessment that China undertook in recent years, which provided the technical support for post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this. And China is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, and disasters here feature a wide variety of coverage, higher frequencies, and huge losses. These are also China's basic national conditions. Since 2008, the country has suffered from several major disasters. First, as shown in this slide, in the early 2008, a heavy snowstorm and freezing weather hit southern China. With a wild coverage and great intensities, it has become the most severe low temperature and freezing disaster in southern China over the past 5 decades. Next, please. And on May 12th in 2008, China was struck by the devastating 8.0 magnitude of Wenchuan earthquake. Over 69,000 people lost their lives in this disaster, and it was the single most destructive earthquake since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, with the most serious casualties since the Tangshan earthquake in 1976. And from the 2009 until now, May the 12th has been commemorated as China's National Day for Disaster Prevention and Reduction. Next, please. And in 2010, an earthquake measuring 7.0 struck Yushu in Qinghai province in China, causing over 2,000 deaths. Located in the higher altitudes, the basic civil structure house in Yushu are vulnerable to earthquakes. Almost all the houses were completely destroyed and collapsed. Next, please. And in 2010, and the heavy rock flow occurred in Zhouqi in Gansu province, and located in the Qinling fault belt area. The Zhouqi is a mountainous area with its mountains severely broken and prone to geological disasters. The sudden heavy rain lasted for more than 40 minutes and caused this deadly landslide. This mud flow, up to 5,000 kilometers long, 300 meters wide, and 5 meters thick, in untiled buildings and roads in areas where it flows through. Next. And the part of the above-mentioned major disasters, an earthquake with magnitude 70.0 hit Lushan County in Sichuan province, and another with the magnitude 6.5 struck in Ludian County in Yunnan province in 2013 and 2014 respectively, both causing casualties and huge economic losses. Next, please. Next, thank you. Next, please. Yeah, and China has also been affected by major disasters in its neighboring countries. The Nepal earthquake with a magnitude of 7.8 in 2015 caused casualties and economic losses to China's Tibet autonomous regions adjacent to Nepal. Next, please. And on August in 2017, an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.0 occurred in Jiuzhaigou Valley in Sichuan province. And as a UNESCO's World Heritage Site, Jiuzhaigou Valley, affected by the earthquake, is a loss to not just China, but also to the world at large. Next, please. And the Chinese government has successfully carried out comprehensive assessments of the above-mentioned disasters and a comprehensive loss assessment system for major disasters capable of field investigations, remote sensing monitoring, simulation assessments, and grassroots statistics has been established. The system and its technical methods and standards are now relatively mature. Next, please. And in the following part of my presentations, I will introduce two essential assessments we carry out in recent years. They are catastrophic disaster direct loss assessment and catastrophic disaster indirect effect assessment. Next, please. And to comprehensive and timely master the information on losses caused by especially seriously natural disaster and thus provide a basic for decision making when the central government and local governments make plans on recovery and constructions of disaster hit area. And the central governments of China has, since the Wenchuan earthquake, conducted this kind of comprehensive loss assessment for the catastrophic natural disasters. The goal is to apply a multiple source data and various technical methods to make a comprehensive assessment of the scope of the disasters, casualties, physical damages to houses, households, properties, infrastructures, etc., and as well as the direct economic losses. So this can help us summarize the features of the disasters and make practical suggestions for recoveries and constructions. In this process, scientific, objective, fact-based, standardized, and strict measures should be taken. Next, please. And comprehensive direct loss assessment for catastrophic disasters in China is conducted under working mechanisms. Mechanisms participates by multiple departments at multiple levels. For example, the experts from the experts committees of National Committee for Disaster Reduction, from the National Disaster Reduction Center, and from the provincial governments of disaster-affected regions will carry out this assessment. And the ministries of the relating industries will examine and verify the assessment results, and a report recognized by all the parties will be submitted to the central government. Next, please. In order to timely, comprehensively, and objectively reflect loss and scientifically carry out the comprehensive disaster assessment, China set up a statistical system for catastrophic nature disaster losses in 2014 in accordance with relevant laws, regulations, and statistics system. And the system has more than 700 indicators for 27 reports covering almost all sectors affected by the various disasters, including the people's affected, residential and non-residential houses affected in urban and rural areas, the loss of residential properties, the loss of the agriculture, industrial and public services and resources and environmental affected. Next, please. And since the winter earthquake, various methods started to be applied to the comprehensive assessments of major disasters. Later, as the comprehensive assessments of several major disasters, such as Yushu earthquake, was carried out, its main methods was gradually set. When the disaster occurs, first, based on scope and the features, we will clarify the data requirements for the comprehensive assessment and communicate with the relevant departments, research institutes, and enterprises to obtain related data. Second, we will obtain the remote sensing data of disaster hit areas before and after the disaster. And at the same time, the background geological data, social economic data, and historic course data will be retrieved. According to the above mentioned data, we will use various methods to carry out individual assessments, such as on-site investigations and grassroots statistics reporting, and GIS and model simulation, and so on. This is next, please. Yeah. This is on-site investigation, grassroots statistics. Besides, the Chinese government will organize the related personnel to report disaster situations from the town, country, city, province, and to the central government, 5 levels, according to the statistics systems. And on the basis of the reported statistics and data and the scope of the disaster, the central, provincial, municipal, and county governments and the relevant authorities will send the investigation teams to conduct on-site comprehensive or sample investigations to verify the reported data. And the on-site investigations is clarified into 2 types. First one called the comprehensive investigation and sample investigation. The first one conducted comprehensive investigations into all affected properties, assets, and resources, and figure out direct economic losses based on various categories and idioms. But it is rarely used because it is time-consuming and very expensive. See, now we usually use the second one. It's called the sample investigations. So by using this kind of assessments, we select the number of samples from the main victims of the disaster and conduct comprehensive investigations into the samples. So the loss ratio of affected properties, assets, and resources multiplied by that of the total value will be the direct economic loss. And the method is now commonly used in China. So when disaster occurs, the government usually sends a team of experts to make the sample investigations into the damaged houses and the infrastructure, the crops, and so on. Next, please. Yeah, next, please. Yeah, remote sensing monitoring is also a very efficiency assessment methods. And currently, China combines remote sensing technology with GIS, GIS technologies in disaster assessment. Remote sensing technology is mainly used for disaster investigations and dynamic modelings, while the GIS for data management and model prediction. This is a remote sensing monitoring image for floods in Tongjiang Sea in Heilongjiang province in China. And it clearly shows the changes in disaster hit area before, during, and after the floods. With this data based on how the area is inundated, we can make the multiple level assessment to improve the accuracies. Next, please. And this is a UEV monitoring image of the earthquake-stricken area. So by manually or automatically drawing on this picture, we can clearly determine the number of houses collapsed, severe damage, slightly damaged, or not damaged. Compared with the satellite remote sensing images, UEV monitoring is more accurate, but with smaller coverage and higher costs. Next, please. Yeah, this is a remote sensing monitoring image of Ludian earthquake with a magnitude of 7.0. The left one shows the damage to Ludian main roads, which can provide important reference for transporting emergency supplies. And the right image is the distribution of the secondary geological disasters obtained through the remote sensing interpretations and analysis. So in other words, it presents the situation where landslides and mudslides caused by an earthquake, helping the government to resettle the people in time to avoid the secondary casualties. Next, please. And moreover, we will also use empirical and simulation models for assessments. By importing real-time monitoring and forecasting data, as well as the physical geographies and socio-economic background data through the empirical and simulation models, we can figure out the scope of the disaster impacts and loss. Next, please. And taking an earthquake, for example, based on the earthquake intensity models and the principle of attracting carrier informations and the earthquake vulnerabilities matrix of houses collapsed and damaged, we can determine the scope of disaster, collect important information around the earthquake epicenters, such as the names of towns, counties, cities, and the distribution of the rivers and the transportation, and become clear about the number and the distribution of the damaged houses. To conduct the direct data analysis first based on the assessed inventories in affected area. When an earthquake occurs, we verify the effectiveness of assessed inventories assessment according to the assessed output ratio. And second, we use, by using the economic loss data, we calculate the stock loss ratios of fixed assets according to the different intensities. And third, we calculate the loss ratios of the areas with different intensities. And finally, we figure out the direct economic loss. Next, please. And a part of the above mentioned individual assessment, we also make the comprehensive assessments of the scope of the major disasters and physical damage and the direct economic loss. For first, areas impact assessment. It includes building a comprehensive damage indicator, calculating indicators, clarify the areas, and drawing the areas impact assessment map. So second, the damage amount assessment. It contains comprehensive examinations and verifications through the multiple channels of the core indicators, comparative examinations and verifications with basic data, and comparative examinations and verification with other regions according to the damage severities. Third, based on the result of the damage amount assessments by determining the percentage of the damage, economic losses, and replacement costs per unit, we calculate direct economic loss. Next, please. And these are the disaster impact maps we made for 6 particular serious natural disasters. We usually divide the affected area into 4 categories: extremely severely damaged affected area. Second is the severely affected area. Third is a slightly affected area, and the fourth is affected zones according to the different severities for losses. And they are reflected in different colors. So in this way, National Development and Reform Commissions China can carry out targeting and differentiated recovery and the reconstruction plan. Next, please. And it's worth mentioning that our countries has also assisted other countries in post-disaster reconstructions by carrying out the disaster loss assessment. For example, after the earthquake in Nepal in 2015 and the Ecuador in 2016, China organized and sent relative experts to the disaster areas to carry out the assessment, especially for the economic losses, house damage, and infrastructure. The Nepal earthquake, which is a cultural disaster for Nepal and the world, caused 3 World Cultural Heritage sites serious damage. Therefore, our expert team also includes experts from the Cultural Tourism Departments, making a relatively comprehensive assessment for of their cultural heritage losses. So in the end, we put forward relative reconstruction suggestions in 4 aspects: people's livelihood and infrastructure restorations, public services facility restorations, cultural relic, and the capacity buildings for disaster preventions and reduction. Next, please. Yeah, and next I will give a very short introduction of the second part. It's called the catastrophic disaster indirect effect assessment. Next, please. And in the past, the Jiuzhaigou earthquake of magnitude 7.0, the direct loss was evaluated according to the above methods and regulations. And in the meantime, due to the particularities of the earthquake, we also carry out and the direct assessment, including the effect on the ecosystem, the tourism industry, and the landscape, and so on. So the indirect economic losses of some parts were estimated using the methods and the regulations which were recognized internationally. It was difficult for some parts to assess their indirect economic loss, and the indirect effect was assessed by the qualitative judgment. Next, please. So next, I will give a very quick introduction how we conduct the indirect economic losses on Jiuzhaigou earthquake. First is the tourism industry loss, and Jiuzhaigou Valley scenic area and other scenic spots in the affected area was effectively serious by the earthquake, using some indexes such as average consumptions per persons per day, average tourism days, and average numbers of tourism spots. The indirect economic losses were estimated. Also, the effect on the tourism industry of Sichuan province was a qualitative judgment using the following numbers of the tourists. Next, please. The second is the landscape impact. And Jiuzhaigou is not only the world natural heritage, but also a national level scenic spot. So the assessment selects the source of the sceneries, the space, and the integrities of the sceneries and the evaluation factors, and taking the Jiuzhaigou scenic area. All the scenic spots affected within the scope are divided into 4 levels: major changes, minor changes, and basically intact. Next, please. And third is the ecosystem loss. Through the assessment, the service function of the forest ecosystem was affected seriously by the earthquake. The following service function, including water conservation, the conservation of soil, carbon sequestrations, oxygen release, accumulation of nutrients, and atmospheric environmental purifications, as well as biodiversity conservation, was assessed by the quantitative evaluations or qualitative judgments. Next, please. Loss is the secondary geological disaster, and the secondary geological disaster caused by the earthquake were seriously, the characteristics of which were small scale, large quantities, concentrated, wide range, and serious damage affected by the duplicated effects of the Wenchuan earthquake, Lushan earthquake, and Jiuzhaigou earthquake. All the 3 earthquakes I mentioned above are happening in Sichuan province. The risk of occurrence of the landscape collapse as well as a mudslide in affected area has been increased obviously. Next, please. Yeah, this is all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. San, for sharing all this important information, comprehensive disaster loss assessment, multiple methods to comprehensive assessment technologies, the remote sensing monitoring you shared with us, combining with the GIS disaster and your disasters investigation. Thank you also for sharing on the calculations of direct losses and a specific example of the earthquake in Jinshuahao with indirect losses calculation for tourist ecosystems and secondary geological disasters. If anyone would like to, from the participants, to send us your question, please write in the Q&A. We will start the Q&A with Mr. San Shi and Mr. Koji Suzuki-san from ADRCC in Japan. And I will start with the first question for Suzuki-san about data. We received a question, sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, we received a couple of, you have read them?
Data. Yes, I have seen some of the questions on the screen. And for the first question,
sorry, could you, you relate to the question first?
Relate?
Yes, which question are you answering?
Okay. Maybe, can I say something?
Sure.
Yes. One of the most important questions is the MOBIBAG software and the privacy of the individuals. Actually, the MOBIBAG software is dealing with the mobile phone communication data, which is stored and managed by mobile phone network operators in the countries. So if the mobile phone network operators and the government authority for COVID-19 countermeasures have some agreement for the privacy of the subscribers, you can keep the privacy of the mobile phone subscribers who are infected by COVID-19. Anyone can be seen who is infected by COVID-19 with the analysis of the MobiPack software. So it is not so difficult to keep the privacy of the mobile phone subscribers who are infected by COVID-19. That's one thing. And I can also touch with the platform for the satellite imagery, maybe. And if you ask this question to me, the solution, the response from my side is Sentinel Asia, which is the platform to share the satellite imagery for disaster risk reduction. You can visit Sentinel Asia through the website. The countries for disaster risk reduction, the government organization for disaster management can join this platform to share and ask us to analyze the satellite imagery for disaster affected area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki-san. I have a question for Mr. San Shi. Have you carried out any multi-hazard risk assessment up to the village level? And if yes, how did technology plays a role in these assessments at the macro level? What is the most promising example of technology adoption in China with reference to earthquake early warning system?
For the first questions, how we are using the village level technology. Basically, in my opinion, if we want to conduct the micro levels of, like the village level of the assessments, firstly we must get the local informations, the village level informations of the particular areas, like the number of the peoples or how many houses was located in the village. And usually the central government will send some requests to the local government to get this kind of informations. But every time we send our request, maybe cost too much time. So we started a very big very big missions. We request all of the villages. We collect all the informations in every village in China. Maybe it's lasts for 5 years. We can get a very huge number of data. So later we don't need to send a request because we also have this kind of informations. And the second question. What is the question? Sorry. So I saw a question. It means it's called, is there a computer program that local government can use? Yes. Now in NDRCs in China, we developed many kinds of the computer systems. For example, we have a software called the rapid earthquake assessment system. Once the earthquake occurs, we receive the information from the Chinese earthquake administrations. We input this relative information like the epicenters, the altitude, the latitude, the time, and the magnitude. And the software will automatically give us the outcomes of the potential damage of these particular areas within 5 minutes. So basically the assessment numbers, we send the number to the central government. And after a few days, they get the reported informations by the local government. They compare the assessment numbers and the reporting numbers. And by the comparisons, we improve our accuracies of our assessment outcomes. And we also help the local government to build their own computer systems to make their decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I still have one question for you. There are many questions from different participants. I have one from the Philippines, Edgar Reyes. He is asking, the catastrophic directed and indirected effect assessment is a good initiative from China. It covers multiple areas and concern. He is wondering how experts or stakeholders were consulted or involved in the heritage and ecosystem component of indirect effect assessment.
Yes, I mentioned in my slides, China has built the multiple level mechanisms. When the disaster occurs, we build experts committees of national levels. Many experts' names was in these committees. So if the earthquake, if the earthquake happens, we can select the we can select some of the experts in the name list of these committees. So we tap from them so they can we can send the experts to the local areas. We have experts from the different departments, like the industrials, agricultures, and transportations. We use every expert with its unique technology, with the unique knowledge to assess every sectors of this assessment. So combines their opinions, we form the whole reports.
I still have many questions for you in the Q&A. I will ask you one more. It is about the impact assessments, which you were sharing with us is very comprehensive. But there is a question from Wellars about if you're taking into account and assess the individual, community, emotional, and social after effects to account for the overall community movement impact.
Can you repeat, please? Sorry.
Just briefly, is how you are considering the individual, community, emotional, and social effects after the impact of the disaster. If that is also into your comprehensive assessment.
Basically, we do not include the social this kind of impact into our reports, but in particular, in very in unique situation like Jiuzhaigou, because it happened in a very famous heritage site, so we include this kind of parts like social or economics, but we don't include every time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Suzuki-san, there is one question about documenting lessons learned. How you are documenting lessons learned and bringing it to the local people using technology. Hello?
I can't get the point of the question.
The question is, how do you communicate the lessons to the lessons learned from your projects to the community, to the people?
Yes, after we apply our technology to a community, we always make some small meetings to get the response from the communities, and based on the response from the communities, we can modify our technologies and how we can apply the technology the next time based on the need of the communities. So communication between the communities and our side is very, very important to better application of the technologies.
Thank you very much to both the speakers. We still have many questions in the Q&A, so I welcome your answers if you can see them in your feature and answer them to the participants while the next presentations are going on. Let me close this part of the session. Thank you, Mr. Sanshi and Mr. Koji Suzuki-san, for your presentations in the course. Let me introduce our next speaker, Professor Sunny Yan, who is the director of the International Collaboration Center on DRR from Beijing Normal University in PRR, China. Professor Sunny, you are going to share with us about social media in disasters, so over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Anna. Can you hear me now?
We do, but we have an echo.
Okay, well, this is for the environment. But anyway, I'm very happy. First, thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. And I'm really happy to share some of our progress in this social media data-based disaster risk reduction. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, so recently in China, we have more than 500 million people who are frequently using social media. So actually, this has already accumulated a lot of data resources. So there always a question that can we better use social media data in disaster risk assessment? And in the recent 2 years, we had a national key research project, which is focusing on how to utilize this big data and use it in disaster management. So today I'm very happy to share some of our findings in the recent 2 years. Thank you. Next slide. So I will briefly introduce the features of social media data and then bring up 2 case studies.
Professor Yang, we can barely hear you.
You can hear me?
Cannot.
Is
We
it better
cannot.
now? You can hear me?
Very bad
Hello?
connection, also very bad sound.
Can
you hear me now? Is it okay now?
It's
Much better.
to use the headset.
Well, I have a wrong plug for my headset. All right. So, can we continue now?
It is much better, but if you can be a little bit closer to the computer.
All right. Okay. So let's start with our start with the content. Next slide, please. Yeah. So talking about social media data, it has certain advantages. For example, it's very fast. The promptness is very rare. After any disaster event, you can quickly gather a lot of information. And since more and more people are using social media, we actually have more possibility in exploring all kinds of possible applications. But of course, there are a lot of issues with social media data. First is all these data are subjective. Usually, they are reflections of a personal opinion. And also, due to the perception variation, it is very difficult for us to get reliable assessment results. So next slide. So right now, there are different data processing techniques. They are mainly composed by 4 parts. The first part is data acquisition. How can we get data? Well, we have a general purpose web crawler, we have focused crawler, we have incremental web crawler, and also deep learning web crawler. Then another part is a pre-process. Because social media data usually means a lot of data cleaning, and then we need to have data integration or transformation to really synthesize all different types of data sources. And of course, here are data reduction. We have criticization and content certification. Besides this, we have the content analysis. Right now, the popular content analysis, including correlation analysis, spatial temper analysis, content analysis, and emotion analysis. And the last part is statistical report. How can we use the visualization technique to really display the information? Next slide, please. So the first example is the Super Typhoon Kima. Next slide. Next slide, yes. Super Typhoon Kima is one of the largest typhoons last year. It brings about like 60 billion RMB losses last year. And so with this typhoon event, we actually
Yeah, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear
still
you.
not edible.
Yeah, not audible at all.
No.
Can I suggest, Professor Sani, that
Yes.
we stop here and we're going to move to the next speaker and try
Yes.
to find another room in which you can have not the noise, okay? And we come back to the
Yes.
slide
Okay.
2.1.
All right, let me try to find another room. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Sani is right now at the Ministry of Emergency Management, so she will need to find a second room. Let me introduce our next speaker while Professor Sani it will do better connection. Our next speaker is Mr. Sanjay Srivanstava. He is Chief for Disaster Risk Reduction in our sister agency, UNESCAP. Mr. Sanjay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna and colleagues, and thanks a lot for giving opportunity to UNESCAP to speak about the experiences of Asia Pacific region on leveraging frontier technology for disaster risk reduction and building resilience. So I thought this is a opportunity to highlight what technology could do or doing in present COVID crisis, and how some of the experiences which were of technology applications in disaster risk reduction were helpful in COVID related on combating COVID. So let me have my first slide, please. My next slide indicates you know, when we talk about technology, it's not one technology, it's a system of systems, many technology systems on ground. For example, COVID itself is basically a system of, you know, health related crisis. So now a system of health related crisis, when it interacts with other technology systems, then that is how all whatever response mechanisms develop depends on how one system interacts with the other systems. So I'm talking about the system of the systems, particularly in terms of the technology, which were put to use for COVID response in recent times. So you see the system of the systems, there are three systems which really made a game-changing role in COVID context today on a non-medical side. One is the system one, risk analytics. Most of the country use sensor web, artificial intelligence, drones. So this system, Earth observation satellite, which Koji-san spoke so eloquently. Now we have one part of the system. The other is big data ecosystem, where Internet of Things, crowdsourcing, social media. Professor Sani was talking about the social media experiences. Then come to some of the other part of the technology, which is digital identity, where machine learning, blockchain systems comes into role. So when you have bring system of the systems together and then present this system with the health crisis on the ground, it makes a lot of difference. The difference I would like to highlight: early detection of the disease for early warning, rapid diagnostic of the disease, because these are the critical part to combat COVID, risk governance, the whole mechanism of the governance and communicating the risks to the key decision makers or to the community. In public health, that's a very, very key part. Then telehealth, doctor doesn't have to come to everybody, but they have to be connected remotely. And the delivery of the services, where it is a basic services in terms of money, in terms of delivery of the entitlements, the social protection mechanisms. So these are the system of the system which has been found very helpful to protect people in the crisis, and particularly in the present crisis. So my next slide is in SCAP we did in early days. This is the left side, the SCAP publications. What is What are those technologies which are making difference to combat COVID at earliest days? And taking examples of the country like Republic of Korea, China in the beginning days, how they could able to control it, early detection, early warning. So there are variety of innovations. When crisis comes, it brings huge innovations to combat the crisis. So new innovations were accelerating capacity to track the tracking of COVID-19, then hotspot mapping from the tracking to mapping out the cluster of the infected community, what it becomes hotspot, and then hotspot to containment zone. Many countries even today has been struggling to do this. And then finally, the COVID transmission is outspaced by the technology related interventions. So my next slide is to show you some of the pioneering efforts in early detection, early warning, which I told you when innovation crisis comes, it brings a lot of innovations. I would like to highlight few. You have already heard from China, Republic of Korea, Japan experiences. Let me tell you about one that is Intermedica. This is basically artificial intelligence and doctors together. It has it provides the platform in 32 languages. It covered many European country, African country, many parts of the world. And this has been very, very helpful in contact tracing worldwide. It's developed by a group of the companies, Alliance Industry with Microsoft and many top techies companies work together to develop this platform. There is a heat health engine. This is an initiative Australia government took. They took a dynamic tracking of the infection. It has been very helpful in Australia. The next one, next slide, please. There are few which I just brought the trace together, a great initiative using Bluetooth technology by Singapore. COVID Watch, this was a Stanford University. It found to be very helpful in US. COVID Safe, the Australia government. Arogya Setu, one of the world's most downloaded apps of contract tracing in India. So, these are the new innovations which helped in early detection of the disease, tracking it, and containing it. So that's the part of the technology is purely AI based, and the system of the system which I highlighted in the beginning. My next slide is the next one is the assessment of the risk. When you are tracking the virus, the person who's been infected by the virus, now wherever he is going, his surroundings becomes like a risk zones. So you do lot of what is called now from contact tracing to geospatial technology to locate a person and his surroundings, and that becomes a kind of a risk hotspots. And those risk zoning, most of the country have been able to experience today, started with the China, identified the red zone, yellow zones, green zones, and most of your economic activity, social activity, you moderate based on the risk zones. So this is what is the risk zone. These are the area which were extremely popular in traditional disaster risk reduction. We used to have seismic microzonation, flood microzonation. So the very idea of seismic and flood microzonation from disaster risk reduction experience came to the COVID combating. And that was helped many countries. My next slide, the next slide please. The next one. Yes. So before I conclude this part of the presentation, I want to tell you the most difficult part of the world where containing COVID was really a challenge it was not a challenge of a country, but the whole worldwide. And I would like to tell you what technology did. This is a story of Dharavi in Mumbai, India, Asia's biggest slum. 2.1 kilometer area, you have population of 1 million, the most densely populated. When COVID transmission started in this Dharavi, it was a real super spreader event. in Mumbai, and there was a big concern worldwide when COVID reaches to the poorest of the people who are in densely populated areas, share the same communities, facilities, whether it is a toilet, hygiene, what will happen? This will be a real spreaders epicenter. But then you use technology thanks to the Mumbai Municipal Corporation and the government. They used the best of risk joining what I told to you, then training and skill development of health worker, 4T, tracing, tracking, testing, treatment, and then investing in trust building, community to trust that these technologies are for them and it will be very helpful. In the end, there are some good examples coming out. Today, Dharavi COVID crisis is being brought under the control. There are only 83 active cases. So that shows technology can make a difference in the most vulnerable context that anybody can imagine. So that's my next slide now is what were the challenges of using technology? Legal ramification, many countries feel there are a privacy clause. So how country could able to combat this clause? One of the best example is the first time Google and Apple, they started working together on contract tracing to Silicon Valley giants for public humanitarian support. They joined hand together to build Bluetooth technology, which doesn't violate the privacy. So those are the innovation on the top of the innovations. Then the cost involved, you need a smartphone, you need a dense network, then lack of a skill, high broadband access, amplify social inequalities because those who have the access to the technology, they were getting better treatment than those who were not having access to the technology, unable to reach poorest of the poor. So all 6 were the challenges which were experienced. Can I have my next slide, please? The next slide, I wanted to tell you that COVID, you cannot see COVID in isolation. You see COVID when it collides, when it intersects with other disasters, because COVID is since Feb 2020. In between, there are many cyclones, floods, heat waves, the desert locust, they came and collided with the COVID. Now this COVID is changing the disaster risk escape. Most of the disasters understanding what we had in the past. Now the intersection of pandemic with extreme climate event is a new disaster risk hotspot. It's a truly systemic risk, a cascading disaster, the intersection of biological risk with the natural extreme climate event. And that makes much more challenging for a country to manage. We have brought out a report, the left-hand side, it shares how Asia Pacific region has been struggling to combat 2 disasters at a time on the ground. My next slide, the next slide is I would like to show you on ground how 2 disasters collide. So this is the scenario. I took this scenario analysis from my colleague, Professor Rajiv Shah. The scenario is you have a natural disaster or man-made disaster, and then you have a biological disaster, and both are intersecting. So this intersection brings a risk complexity of highest uncertainty. How to manage this? And this was seen when Cyclone Amphan, which was one of the deadliest cyclone which hit Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh, India together, and there were 3 million people who were evacuated to protect from the cyclone. So the cyclone shelters were located in those places. You see the red dot, which are the cities or small towns where the COVID incidents were, the transmission were picking up. So transmission picking up, meantime cyclone hit. You need social distancing to prevent people from the transmission, but at the same time you need to protect people who are on the track of the typhoon or on the cyclones, so they need to go to cyclone shelters. So this is the conflict risk scenario and very difficult for country to manage. My next slide is how to manage such situation on the ground. We showed one example. We used climate, what we call seasonal forecast. From June to September, what could be the possible flood or drought situation, in particularly in South Asia, and what will be the COVID situation. So we use a climate risk assessment intersected over the transmission of the COVID on the ground, and we could able to locate the dynamics of the cascading risk in different cities, which you see on the slides. The next one, please. The next slide. What to do as a key professional, as a technology expert, if you are given such complex situation, how a government can manage. So the solution that comes is many countries, those who work in disaster risk reduction, one of the key area of multi-hazard early warning system is now impact-based forecasting and risk-informed early warning system. So you don't have to understand directly in terms of the cyclone, in terms of the speed of the wind and storm surges, but its impact on the ground and the likelihood of the impact. See the risk matrix of a disaster, right-hand side, risk matrix of COVID, left-hand side. So you have two risk matrix which are very different. But on ground, when you have to manage, you have to use this risk and indexing to especially to act on the ground, to respond to this kind of cascading risk. My next slide will show you, the next slide will show you one example from Bangladesh. What I told you, the risk matrix. So this risk matrix shows those hospitals which are in the region where there is a collision of COVID and cyclone on floods taking place in Bangladesh. And what is the kind of hospitals with bed size and other things are available in that risk hotspot zone. This is a hotspot of cascading disaster risk zone. So you are in a position to understand the exposure to your hospitals and also the people who are exposed to the flood risk. My next slide is, next slide please. The next slide is, we have to make some fundamental changes in managing disaster risk, particularly when there are cascading risks, systemic risk on the ground. We have to change our standard operating process of evacuating people, managing cyclone or floods, taking into account biological risk on the ground. This is one example from Pacific Disaster Center I wanted to highlight. This formed the basis of updating a standard operating process in Bangladesh to manage what we call the risk indexing, two disasters having different kind of risk profile. The next slide, please. Yes, now the world or country have to manage to climate risk and biological risk together. In Sendai framework, there are 34 times mention of biological and natural hazards together. So this is a time to realize this. And this time we have particularly disaster risk reduction community and health sector. We have many grounds to cover. My next slide is again, the health system must be risk informed. When you are building a hospital in those areas which are also hotspot of the health hazard, disaster risk, those hospitals must be risk informed. We have to develop new standard operating process for managing floods as well as pandemic or waterborne diseases, vector-borne diseases together. But regional cooperation makes a lot of sense because these are the transboundary events and countries' cooperation among them will be very critical. The next slide is just, I would like to conclude with two recent examples. One is the examples from Republic of Korea, the great example, the epidemiological survey system, which has a very rich epidemiological investigation report. And then we have a SCAP data dashboard portal, which brings how much is the stimulus package countries have committed, particularly to invest in managing crisis. So where those investment and the investment related to preparedness for the health or disaster risk, to what extent those can be managed. So this is one example. My next slide is, I would like to end this presentation that in UNSCAP, we had an intergovernmental meeting just last week, and the meeting came with many brilliant ideas on building resilient health infrastructure, the supply chain resilience, and then using a space-derived information for dynamic risk assessment. And the next slide, yes, this is the last slide. So this is the final agreement that came from ISCAP Committee on Disaster Risk Reduction, that the initiatives, particularly those coming from the fiscal stimulus, should address this kind of crisis in the future. The next slide, please. Yes. So I would like to conclude that there are this crisis has brought a lot of innovations, and when you see that the fiscal stimulus packages, which most of the country in the world, they have, Japan, for example, it is one of the largest fiscal stimulus package. India, it is a 10% of country GDP. So the investment of those, most of the country are investing more for transformative technology, a technology which can make difference, which can take a country or its people out of the crisis. And that's the way forward to come out from a crisis like COVID and also the disaster when both intersects, investing in technology, investing in innovations. And from that point of view, this is an excellent webinar. And thank you once again for giving opportunity to speak to me. And thank you once again. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay, for your comprehensive presentation. Let me pass over to Sanjaya Bhatia, our head, for questions and answers. Sanjaya, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And very quickly, because we still have to hear from Professor Seni, but we have a couple of questions. I think a few questions a bit burning, and I see David Green is still here, though the hour is very, very late for him. So David, you have marked one question for live answer. May you explain about recovery disaster models in remote areas? So David, would you like to respond to that quickly?
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo what was discussed in the last presentation. It's that taking that systems level approach, particularly in remote areas, by including the social and cultural aspects along with the hazard information. It's particularly important in those locations to reconnect the population. So the models and the analysis and the observations using the technology that's relevant. Usually in remote areas, there's much more of a cultural significance to changing behavior. And that has to be included with the technology. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, David. There is one question for Mr. Zhang Shi also. What is the time scale for carrying out the assessments? And can they be carried out during the emergency response phase? Mr. Zhang Shi, could you answer that quickly? Maybe, okay, then we'll come there back later. Sanjay, hello.
This is David Green. I just want to make a quick comment on that one.
Okay, okay, yeah, go ahead, please.
We've done quite a bit of work on this issue of the timescale of when information is relevant to the risk assessment. It's really, if you're doing it during the event, it's very important that it happens as soon as possible, and that in fact, we thought it was weeks and months and long term for that information to be important, but timeliness is very important. So there's been a great emphasis on rapid risk assessments. So I just wanted to make that comment, which means days to weeks, not months.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, David. Sanjay,
may I also adding some response to that question to
sure.
The timescale in the risk assessment?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Because
yeah.
as I know, in our system we have a full cycle assessment. That means
like a pre-event, besides like an earthquake, for typhoons or flood, we always have like a pre-event risk assessment. And it's right after the event happening, usually we'll have daily risk assessment as well as weekly risk assessment and monthly risk assessment. So it can cover the whole process of the emergency response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question for Sanjay. What is your suggestion for a country like Nepal, where the lockdowns are continuing and disasters are also? So reflecting on what you said, that with COVID-19, there are other disasters also happening. So how can we manage that situation and keep people safe in secured places? Sanjay?
Thank you. Actually, this is the real challenge which I flagged off in my presentation, that this is a experience which many countries never had before. But at the same time, we have many new innovations where you develop a risk matrix for the COVID and risk matrix for floods or cyclone, and then you intersect both the matrices. This is where you need all the data science, the new tools, because it cannot be done manually, or somebody in the back of their mind, a disaster management at a down the line level, it will be very hard for him to anticipate. It has to be done with a real data science applications to intersecting risk profile, and then you have to pick up those partial of the land where both are taking place, floods and COVID in Nepal, for example, are taking place simultaneously. And then the strategy for interventions has to be risk informed. That's the point I was trying to highlight. Risk informed early warning. So risk for COVID is very different from the risk to the floods. So on ground, if you have a two risks intersecting, you need to be a risk-informed early warning system, and that's the place where technology innovations can make huge impact. So in case of Nepal, I'm sure the disaster management community and the health community, the Ministry of Health, together, if they have, I'm sure they will have their own databases of the public health services down the line, and the disaster community will have the database on the flood-related areas, the dynamic flood risk assessment from multiple sources. So this two collaboration on a data platform will be critical, and that's where the future of managing systemic risk lies. So I think that's my advice. Thank you, Sanjay.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. And now we go back to Professor Sani Yang. You have about 5 to 7 minutes. I said if you can focus on the key very important messages, and then we'll have another. We have some questions also to be answered, so we'll go into the questions again. So thank you, Professor Sani.
Thank you very much. So I'll try to keep my information very concise, short and concise. So let's scroll down. Yeah, of course, I just to quickly, next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, next. Yeah, here I just want to introduce the first case, because I have already talked about this, the important data processing techniques for social media application in DRR. So the first case is Likima. And Likima is a very severe typhoon disaster we experienced last year, which caused more than half billion RMB loss. Next slide. And the information we got actually is from Weibo, which is pretty similar to Twitter or Facebook. So right after this event, we collected 500,000 different Weibo records. And after cleaning, we still have more than 400,000 records. So from all that, next slide, please. For all this data information, we can run different analysis. The first is we can analyze how this social media data change. What is the hotspot of people's focus? Next slide. And also, we notice that it is possible to use this Weibo information to get the spatial distribution of the of the precipitation and wind field. It's pretty similar. If you run the, well, seems like this is a PDF document. If you run the slides, you will the moving figures will show the spatial distribution is perfectly correlated with the actual precipitation. Next slide. Yeah. So it is quite possible for us right now in China to use this social media data to analyze the disaster intensity and the losses even. Next slide. Here we just run the different correlation analysis, and here the next slide shows some interesting results. Next slide. It seems that with Weibo records, it significantly correlated with the number of affected people and disaster losses. So right now we have a very easy tool to help us to better estimate, to run this rapid assessment. Next slide. And of course, another useful tool with the BOP is the emotion analysis. From the text of these Weibos, we collect the emergency emergency relief demand to find out where is the people who really desperately need some help, and who are the ones that exactly need some food or tent. So with these small tools, it helps us a lot in the response of the KIMA. Next one. The second case I want to introduce is earthquake. That's because China, it has the most continental earthquake in the world. Next slide. This Chongqing earthquake is something happened also last year. It's a Richter scale 6.0, so it's like a medium severity earthquake. So here we also use a Sina Weibo and to set up a model. Next one. Next slide. Yes. The technique actually is pretty straightforward. We collect the data, we check the feasibility, and we construct the word list and use to extract the intensity from the text content, and then we obtain the preliminary intensity map. Then, of course, using the USGS and the CEA observation station data, we get some improvement of our accuracy of this model prediction, and then to produce some simulation for the seismic intensity. Next slide, please. So here is something interesting is that we noticed that it's just right after 22.57, we have a surge of Weibo regarding to, let's say, usually people will say, do you feel the quake? The ground is shaking. Then this surge lasted for like 3 minutes. And we notice that even within 3 minutes, we have thousands of records. And that is really, with all this location of these records, it's really enough to help us to build up a social media-based seismic intensity map. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, then the next thing we did is we would dig out these words and we quickly find this location. And then we notice that there is a change of the hotspot of the spatial distribution, but actually the earliest Weibo give us the epicenter, the location of the epicenter. Next one. Next slide, please. Yeah. So then we analyze this text and we categorize all this text and to match them with different seismic intensity. So with this form, we can construct a very preliminary seismic intensity map. Next one. Well, of course, if we look at this red spots, those are the results after the preliminary analysis. And of course, here are some deviations from the actual intensity map, which we obtained like months after the earthquake. But we notice that the deviation is about 30 kilometers, which is still kind of acceptable. And so in this sense, this quick estimation still is kind of effective to a certain extent. Next one. Then the next step is how can we improve this? And what we did is a grid-based correction method, and we use a heat intensity matrix. So here we have how many people are reflecting this earthquake from the social media data. And what did they say in text? Then we match all this information with observational epicenter and location, and with the help of attenuation records, we get this more detailed shake map on the rightmost of the slide. And the good thing is when we later on, when we fit our fusion intensity map with the actual intensity map made by field work, we notice that about like 100% of this degree 8 area can be correctly identified. About more than 80% of this degree 7 area can be identified, and more than 60 of the 6 intensity area can be identified. So with all this, we have to say that it actually is quite plausible to use social media data to generate some rapid assessment for a seismic map. So with this tool, we actually also tried it in some other small scale earthquake last year in China. Next one. So I know that I have limited time. That a quick summary is, yes, for social media crowdsourcing, yes, they has very fast status tracking capacity. And also all this text in the people's social media data have great details. So it will really help us to identify the special needs of the people affected. But still, we need to remember that this crowdsourcing data can only help us on limited disaster type. Usually it's good, it's more effective on this sudden onset disaster type, but not very good on slow onset disaster type. That means if for earthquake, for typhoon, for flood, maybe it's more powerful, but for something like a drought, it is not that effective. And also, we cannot collect all the data types we need for disaster risk assessment. For example, we cannot have the depth of water. And also, due to the like personal perception and also some due to the rumors, there are certain potential distortion for the results we're getting. So, so in summary, I have to say, it is effective, has been tried and tested in different real cases, but also still we need to be more realistic and prudent when we're using crowdsourcing in disaster management. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yang. And we have a couple of questions already. So let me just go into it immediately. So basically they are around the fact, how do you validate the data that you're picking up from social media? And you mentioned a little bit about that in your point on the distortion.
Yes.
But how do you finally get rid of unreliable social media data? And do you give a disclaimer or inform the users about that? Over.
Yes. A quick question is, for some quick onset, like a sudden onset disaster like earthquake, usually it will just take us 3 to 5 minutes to collect data. So in such a short time, it is very difficult for the people to generate rumors. So we noticed that for sudden onset disaster, this crowdsourcing information is more effective. And for slow onset data, this will be an issue. And so far, we are cross-checking different data resources so that we can better utilize the social media data. Thank you.
Thank you. And another question is, in your opinion, does multi-platform social network analysis give more reliable data as compared to relying on a single platform?
I think so. I definitely think so. I think different data types, different data source, they come from different, they have different power, strength. So they can describe different feature of a disaster. So it is definitely useful to have multiple data source. First, I can cross-checking. Second is we really can use the different features of the data source to describe different information. Thanks. Hello?
Data, you are mute.
I think I lost the connection.
No, you're not. We hear you very well.
Oh, cool.
Sanjaya, are you talking?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. I have a couple of questions more for generally for the panelists, so I'll just go quickly. One question is from a colleague in Nigeria. So how do you manage where the availability of technology might be limited or there are constraints? Could be bandwidth, could be data packages, so on, cost issues and so on. So there was one question. So what are the alternatives, if any? Does anybody want to come in? Any of the panelists? What are the lower cost alternatives to the use of apps and technology? It's open to anyone in the panel. I think this was something which was also asked in an earlier session. So I would say having service centers where you can have the database and simple queues with a PC and a person who can process the data and give the information to the public. Of course, this will not work for early warning, but for other applications. But if there's anyone else, anyone else wants to comment on this? The other question again to Professor Sunny Young is, why did you choose Weibo as a social media data application? And can this also be used in Indonesia?
All right, maybe I can answer this question. I think the reason we use Weibo is because Weibo is the most widely used social media in China because we cannot access Twitter or Facebook in China. And Weibo has a lot of users, more than 0.3 billion people are accessible, are using Weibo. And about 0.1 billion people are frequent users of Weibo, so it has a lot of population. And regarding to the question if this technique can be used in Indonesia or other countries, my answer is yes and no. I think the framework, the methodology framework can be used in any other country, but I think the most difficult part is we really need to, for different types of hazards, no matter it's for earthquake or flood or typhoon, we need to reconstruct your own language database. It's like we need to construct a word list database so that we can better analyze the text of each people's social media. So we can translate their text or picture to the hazard variables you want. And here we need a lot of localization. Thank you.
Thank you. I think with this we will have to go on to the next part, which is there are a few questions. If the panelists want to answer, they can look at in the Q&A and you can type in the answer. Just 3 or 4 questions left. Meanwhile, let me hand over to Mi Kyong from UNPOG to talk about the next session.
Thank you, Sanjaya. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Mi Kyung Park, and I'm Governance and Public Administration Officer at UNPOG, DPIDG, UNDRR. I'd like to briefly introduce next week's session, session 3 on inclusion of vulnerable groups in DRR policy design and implementation to build resilience. Next slide, please. We know that vulnerable groups with special vulnerabilities and needs are disproportionately affected by disasters, including public health emergencies. Thus, engagement and participation of vulnerable groups in DRR policy design and implementation is crucial for ensuring that their special vulnerabilities and needs are addressed and then no one is left behind. So the issue of inclusion of vulnerable groups and leaving no one behind is covered as a cross-cutting theme of the workshop, and its topics of advancing government innovation and leveraging frontier technologies for DRR and building resilience. Next slide, please. So based on this background, these are the content and learning objectives of the session 3. The session 3 will examine special vulnerabilities of vulnerable groups in disasters and will introduce different governance approaches and strategies for ensuring their inclusion. It will also discuss various innovative practices of engaging them in DRR policy designing, implementation, and monitoring and review processes, and building an enabling ecosystem for inclusive DRR strategies. The session will also highlight that through engagement and empowerment of vulnerable groups, they can be the proactive agents of change. Next slide, please. This is the structure of the session. First, the session will begin with the first presentation to provide an overview on the special vulnerabilities of vulnerable groups in DRR and the major policy issues in promoting their inclusion. The second presentation by Dr. Luis Millman and Mr. Andreas Versman will focus on governance innovation for an inclusive and participatory governance for vulnerable groups. The third presentation by our colleagues, Ms. Shane Okuzan and Ms. Aiko Yakiyama from Social Development Division of UNESCOP will specifically focus on gender and disability inclusive approaches. Next slide, please. The fourth presentation by Dr. Kim Malaliu will address ICT and emergency telecommunication, digital inclusion and empowerment of vulnerable groups. We also plan to invite a country case presenter. We'll then have Q&A discussion with the presenters, and the session will finish by introducing the next session and wrap up. Next slide, please. So this is a very brief overview of next week's session 3, and we look forward to your participation in the next week's session. We've seen that many participants indeed have already shared questions, comments, and country experiences on this topic through online discussion and the advanced questionnaire responses. So we very much look forward to your active and enthusiastic discussions. Please note that relevant session materials will be available before the session via the workspace. Thank you, and stay safe and healthy until next week. Thank you, and back to you, Sanjaya.
Thank you. And just to again remind everyone that we are not going through all the material that we have shared with you. So there is more material available. So please, look at that till the next session. And with this, I'd like to thank all the speakers for devoting their time and energy and their sharing their knowledge, and of course all the participants for keeping up a lively Q&A. And today, as you saw, we had many batches of Q&A, so trying to keep it more interactive and to be able to respond to as many questions as possible. So with that, we close. Thank you all, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye. Stay safe.